Alright, so a ton of Final Fantasy 16 information just dropped today across a varying amount of outlets. We're going to be pulling from Gamatsu and Audrey from Twitter because both did a really great job of translating a lot of the key parts of these interviews that really are important. And we're going to start with Gamatsu first, where they talk about director Hiroshi Takai saying that the game is 95% complete as of right now. They're just working on bug fixes and smoothing out all of the rough spots, basically polishing the game up. Yoshida then goes on to say that by the end of the year, we'll have a brand new trailer, another one, complete with a release date, hopefully. So I'm assuming at the Game Awards that we will get that new trailer that will probably have the firm release date attached to it. That makes the most sense to me. The Game Awards has millions of eyes on it every single year, so that's the best place to put your product to get the most eyes on it. Yoshida also ends that by saying that we will get a playable demo for 16 next year, around the time the game is set to release, so maybe a month or so in advance, kind of like what they did with Final Fantasy VII Remake. We will actually get our hands on FF16. And it's going to be interesting to see how people respond to a more action-based Final Fantasy game. And speaking of action, we're going to jump over to Audrey's Twitter, where we have another quote from Takai talking about the game being action-based and how Square Enix isn't necessarily known for having action games, but due to the current market, they think that more people would prefer that style of gameplay, which is something we talked about more in a recent interview, as well as from a press release where Square was talking about reaching outside of the Japanese market, trying to appeal to a global audience. And I think that's something that they're going to do with this game. Obviously, you can keep Japanese sensibilities with your games, and there's always going to be an audience that really wants those hardcore Japanese style games. But there's nothing wrong with incorporating more Western attributes to your games, like a, heavily action-based game. Next, we have information from the director, I believe it's Maehiro? Hopefully I didn't butcher that, but he talks more about the dominants, saying that when a dominant dies, they turn to stone, which we did see in the most recent trailer. Successors could be born either immediately or take hundreds of years to show. Some points in history exist where some dominants lay dormant. Currently, all dominants exist. Now, also there was a clarification in regards to the whole no two dominants can exist at a single time. It seems like it's not in regards to the dominants, but in terms of their elements. So we do see in the trailers two fire-based dominants going at it. Some people think it's maybe two Ifrits. It kind of looks like an Ifrit versus a Phoenix. So in regards to that, it's the elements that are actually going to be the catalyst for this story going forward. So we've got two fire icons when only one fire icon should be existing right now. There's no such rule as one dominant must govern its own country, which we do see in the trailer with Waloed. They have Garuda and Odin governing that nation. Now it's really interesting because over on the IGN interview, they talked about that wall mural from the Ambition trailer, which showcases all of the icons. And interestingly enough, there's an icon there that we haven't seen or heard from yet, and that's Leviathan. So it's kind of interesting to know what's going on with Leviathan. Is Leviathan going to be a part of this story? There's been so much focus on the other icons that, Leviathan's absence feels kind of apparent here. So either the dominant for Leviathan, isn't aware that they're a dominant yet. We've got an asymptomatic dominant walking around not knowing that they could potentially be Leviathan, That's kind of an interesting part of the story I'm hoping they flesh out more of later on. Is Leviathan around? Who is this person who's going to be controlling them? And they also do expand a little bit more in the PlayStation blog in regards to icons and how the icons and the dominants are treated differently in different kingdoms. So in some areas they're revered, they're treated like gods even, seen in a positive light, whereas other areas they're treated like slaves who are just doing the bidding of the kingdom. A lot of people are saying, why wouldn't the icons and the dominants just overpower these kingdoms? Well, based on what we just read, they can't. It comes at a cost, so the more a dominant uses their power, the more they're going to turn to stone and eventually die. So there's a lot of politics going on for these characters. They're going to be put in some really tough situations where they might have to do something they don't want to do because of the kingdom. They're being basically, held under the sword to do certain things. So that's a really interesting aspect of that dominant icon relationship. Yoshi P also does go on to talk about the sound design in this game again. I think this is the second time. So they're saying that they're still fine-tuning the audio and different adjustments for the sound in the game. So this is something that is really intriguing to me. This might be a game where you want to play with a headset so you can really hear all of the different sound design and the effort they put into that. I'm really intrigued. They've brought this up twice now already, so I'm really curious to hear how this game is going to sound. They also do go on to say that the PR plan for this game will kick in at the very end of this year. So Audrey is saying here that if that's the case, we might see a release date from June to September, which makes the most sense. I'm still betting on June, maybe July. That just seems like the best time to release the game. Now, in the IGN article, they do talk about how although Clive will have people surrounding him, he is basically the center of the story. There's a lot of political intrigue going on. We see how the politics will affect Clive, and it's kind of funny because as of right now, we don't really know all that much about Clive. We're learning so much about the people around him, but not Clive himself. We do know that he's on a revenge mission, so he's gonna beat somebody up at some point. So it's gonna be really interesting to learn more about Clive. And also with the IGN interview, they talk about, you know, comparisons to things like Game of Thrones and apparently The Witcher. I guess some people are getting Jerry of the River vibes from Clive, which I don't really quite see. But they talk about how it's being compared to Game of Thrones and how that's just naturally going to happen. And even in development, it was easier for them to say, hey, you know, look at this character from this movie, and then look at this scene from this movie to convey their own original character. So they mentioned like the cockiness of Indiana Jones with the hairline of Vigo the Carpathian from Ghostbusters 2. Sidebar, Vigo scared the shit out of me as a kid. I don't know what it was about that man's face, the scowl, maybe it was the hairline, but he was absolutely terrifying. That painting was scary. And then when he comes into the real world, it's game over, man. I was just terrified as a child. Next, we have more information on the blight in the world of 16. Its affected areas cannot be restored by the mother crystals. Blight is slowly sweeping the land. About 20% of the land has been affected by the blight in the wind continent to the west. Land becomes uninhabitable, but like the moon, there is still oxygen. So you can breathe and you can visit these areas, but these aren't going to be places you want to be vacationing anytime soon. Mayhiro also goes on to say that the battle theme was heavily inspired by Final Fantasy V, specifically the ability customization aspect. He mentions that as you progress through the game, you will learn more abilities that you can mix and match based on your own playstyle. And we do see some of that in the trailers where it looks like Clive is switching between different summon-based fighting styles, which is really cool. So having the option to play how you want is really exciting. There's a new character that we haven't seen yet named Byron, who apparently made Takai cry. So he's a character that's extremely likable, personable, very cheerful, magnanimous. The quotes say, I'm guessing Byron is not going to meet a nice end based on what we're reading, but I don't even know who Byron is yet and I feel sorry for him. There's also new information on the countries of Final Fantasy XVI. So Rosaria has a long history of tradition, Senbrek is very religious, Thelmekia has various governors, the Iron Kingdom speaks a different language, which is really interesting. Waloed likes war, which, you know, based on what we saw in that last trailer, duh. The Crystal Dominion is a politically neutral land filled with Aether with no king. So that's really interesting. Yoshi P also touches on the fact that based on these trailers, it's really hard to tell who exactly is a good guy and who is a bad guy. But in one of the trailers that we see, it's the King of Sanbrek. His name is Sylvester, so we're finally getting that guy's name. And he might seem like a villain, but the bigger issue is the corruption of the world. So there's a lot of gray areas going on in this game's story and with the characters, and some people are even speculating that Clive himself might be doing some things in this game that are not very well received. Takai goes on to say that the game is around 35 to 40 hours long. That's not including any of the side quests. But if you do all of the optional stuff, you'll be playing for about 70 hours or so, and there will be a New Game Plus mode which will have stronger enemies in it. The devs also go on to say that there will be the 6 countries in this game, but we won't be visiting all of them, which I'm perfectly fine with. I really don't want an open world game I would rather have the story take me to somewhere where I then, you know, explore a little bit. And based on what they're saying, that's what's going to happen. So there's going to be different villages and towns and locations in those specific areas that we can explore. I assume they'll be more like biomes instead of huge, massively open world areas. But that to me is kind of reassuring. As much as I enjoy open world games from time to time, it can be a little bit overwhelming because I feel like I need to search every nook and cranny of a map to make sure that I didn't miss anything. So they also do expand a little bit more on the stages aspect of playing through the game's story, saying that there will be areas where you can search for resources and gather them. You can even search for stronger enemies called elite marks. And there will be situations where Clive will need to overcome the odds in a certain area. However, the powers he's obtained from icons will be restricted. So Clive is basically going to have to do things on his own without some of those icon powers to just kind of overpower things. I'm totally cool with having stages or zones, or just kind of having the game go like stage from stage, and oh, suddenly Clive needs to go to this country and then boom, we're there. I don't have to walk on foot or get a chocobo to get there. Also, chocobos and mogs and cactars will be in this game as well. And then we'll end on an excerpt about Dion Lestonge, which I feel like I have to say his name like that. It's just a really fancy, you know, kind of French-ass sounding. They talk about him as a character kind of being the opposite of Clive. Clive is someone who is in a much darker atmosphere, who has sworn revenge, whereas Dion is kind of like your stereotypical prince. He's got the great looks. He's skilled in martial and intellectual arts is how they describe it. He's kind of got the Boy Scout attitude of a Superman with the power of an icon. So it's kind of interesting to see that. And they also do say that just because he's kind of got that, you know, pretty appearance on the outside, that doesn't mean he doesn't have dark spots in his upbringing. So that's going to be an interesting character to look out for, just to see how much more depth he's going to have and what exactly happened to him growing up that might shock some people, you know? So as of right now, that is pretty much most of the information that has come out. I'm sure more will come out later on, maybe some more translations, but this seems to be the most important bits from the articles that were released today. So as always, please leave any of your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think about this information that we've been hit with? It's kind of a blowout when you really think about it. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.